Thank you guys for coming today after lunch and just to the conference in general. We're excited to be here at Pocket Gamer at their first event here in Hong Kong. And today I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about Hypercasual in China and kind of the space we're in here. But first, as a quick introduction, my name is Allison. I've been in gaming for 8 years now. I've always been working in product and analytics teams in games, and that's been the extent of my career. Oh, sorry. I'm Allison. And now I'm with JoyPac, where I oversee operations. These are some of the games that I've worked on: Bejeweled Blitz, Plants vs. Zombies, and then I moved on to game analytics, and then Movie Star Planet, and now I'm at JoyPac. So the start of my career was back at PopCap Games, which is a casual gaming company based out of Seattle. And I was in Seattle for the Pocket Gamer Conference, talking with a colleague of mine who no longer works in games, but I worked with him 6 years ago. I was telling him what I'm doing now with JoyPac and telling him about hypercasual games, and he didn't know what hypercasual games were, which surprised me. And so that really is the basis of this talk. Kind of how it came about was me explaining to this former colleague of mine who was a founder of PopCap Games what this whole thing is. So hypercasual games really it is a new term in the industry. It's maybe 2 years old in terms of its popularity really of coming about as a word. But I do want to say that this type of game, the games that have really easy, simple gameplay, a core loop to them, they have very broad appeal, and they're pretty viral in terms of their shareability. But these games have been around for a long time. You can see kind of back to even 2013 with Flappy Bird's success, Crossy Road, and so on. So these games have been around. It's just a new term that we're calling this particular thing. It really is about a business model as well that has come about with mobile advertising. So it's games kind of taking advantage of this mobile advertising as well. So hypercasual really is a space for developers who play in this rapid development environment. So you can see here like Voodoo and Ketchup, who are big publishers in hypercasual, they're releasing about a game a week, and they're testing even more than that. So hypercasual in terms of a business is about scale and is about getting games out the door. Now, just because some developers wanted to scale up their business and move even faster with their development, that's not the reason why hypercasual is here as a movement. Hypercasual is here because the players are interested in this type of a game. So you can see here that 78% of hypercasual players are playing other games as well. So these really short, snackable games with hypercasual are kind of filling in some gameplay time. They're filling in time when they're waiting for a game to load, or they're just really, these players they want gameplay in all parts of their life, so they're adding this to their gameplay and their game time. So that leaves about 22% of players that are playing hypercasual and only hypercasual games. And the reason why they're doing that is because they have very limited time. So again, these very snackable play sessions appeal to players who maybe weren't playing games before but want something that they can play on the subway while they're, again, waiting for something. So this really has expanded the pie of players as well in the hypercasual space. So hypercasual, I will contend that it really started in the West with Ketchup in particular and Voodoo. This kind of movement started there, and I'll talk about why that is and now how it's moving here to the East and to China in particular. So Pocket Gamer has a great series of articles on hypercasual, how it came about, and I do recommend that you guys read those if you want the full history of that. But back when I was in PopCap, the environment of the App Store looked a little bit like this, where we had casual games, where social mechanics really had come about because of Facebook. They had really smart in-app purchase triggers, and they were really supplemented with advertising. So in-app purchase was the primary business model, but then ads were layered on top. Then we got into more mid-core games, And with these, gameplay got a little bit more in-depth. So they were really, again, playing to that in-app purchase player, making more in-depth concepts, and also kind of mastering these virtual economies. And we also had core games at that time that were part of the competition for these in-app purchase players, which you would call a whale, right? So this was the environment that was happening in the App Store at the time. And when Hypercasual came about, it was kind of back to basics, if you will, or a backlash and some kind of nostalgia in gameplay that was really facilitated again from the ad monetization that was available to players. Available to developers. So developers no longer had to rely on in-app purchase mechanics in their games, so they kind of went back to the basics of the core loop of hypercasual, of gameplay. So in the China market in particular, it's been a little bit different about how hypercasual is developing. Chinese players are kind of moving from core down the line, and they're doing this because of console gaming and PC gaming being so dominant in the Chinese market. So China players didn't have consoles. They flocked to PC play, where these free-to-play mechanics were so dominant. So they've really kind of been moving down the line in terms of this continuum, and that's one reason why the hypercasual trend has been a little bit slower in China. So if you look at the top download charts right now in China versus the United States, this was last week. I pulled the 3 games in the top 10 downloads that were hypercasual. So in China, it's 3 games, and this is just a screenshot of each of them that I would deem hypercasual. If you look at this in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, and other Western markets, it's 10 out of 10 of the top downloaded games right now are hyper-casual. And that's been the trend in the West for a long time. It's very much dominated by these types of games, where in China, you see maybe 3 to 5 games in the top 10 being hyper-casual. So this is just to say that the movement is happening in China. We do see these games gain a lot of popularity. They move very similarly to hyper-casual, which, if you know about this space, it is about kind of trend-seeking behavior by players. They like to find the latest game, they play it for maybe a week, and then they move on to the next type of gameplay that they're interested in. So we see that same type of thing happening in China. It's just with a smaller set of games. And in China, again, their players have been kind of dominated by a different type of gameplay for a long time. So it's been slow to come about. The other reason why hyper-casual games have been slow to come about in China is because of the advertising ecosystem there. That has also been slower to evolve in China. As you know, hyper-casual games are really dependent on, that's how they make their money, is by showing advertising in the game. So you're getting your lifetime value through showing ads. And then you're trying to buy players at a very low cost. That's your CPI. That's the model that we're talking about. In China, the eCPM levels around advertising are very similar now, especially on iOS, between China and the United States. So that has allowed the hyper-casual movement to start coming about in a more major way in this region. The game freeze that happened last year, if you guys know about this, the Chinese government needs to approve games that go to market. Last year, they put a halt on that activity for maybe a 9-month period of time. They opened it up again. They closed it down again. It's kind of been a saga of what's going on here with this space. So China is difficult because of this regulation that is happening. It's something we watch very closely. With hyper-casual games that monetize through advertising, they're a little bit under the radar in terms of all of this activity and what's going on there. It's definitely necessary for Android, but not necessary for iOS, for example. So this is just something to show a little bit about the complication, and one reason why, when you have such a light, snackable game, developers don't want to go to China to deal with all of this regulation. The App Store situation in China is another reason why it's been slow to evolve with hyper-casual, and it's just another complication in the market to be aware of. The Android space over there is very fragmented, at least among the top 15. There are 15 stores that you need to hit in order to get 90% of their market share in terms of Android. That said, there are many, many, many more Android stores that you also need to be aware of for your IP protection. So when we publish a game, we're definitely looking to get it on many Android stores so that we protect that IP, and also, of course, so that we reach this market as well. So China, I don't want to scare you off too much about China. Publishing there, it's a huge opportunity. I think, as this region in particular knows, just the size of what's going on there. There are 250 million approximately iOS devices in China, and that's the same number of devices in total between Android and iOS that are in the United States. So it really is a huge opportunity to tap into. China as well, I think, again, as this audience likely knows, is very mobile-first culture. So as the rise of China's economy has been happening, the mobile rise has happened at the same time. So phones and mobile internet has been really integrated into people's lives there. So they're very happy to be downloading games. They spend a lot more time on their phones in general, and therefore they spend a lot more time playing games than other players. So just quickly, since I have 5 minutes, problem solved. JoyPac offers kind of a West and East blend. We like to talk about how we do both and have that in our business practices. So we would love to talk with you. I have 2 colleagues here as well. We'd love to talk to you about the games that you're developing so we can give you more detail about what we do exactly. But I want to talk about the traction we've had and the games we've launched in particular to give you some tips of what works with hypercasual in this market. We've launched 28 games. We've had 33 million downloads at this point. And as a data person, I love this because there's so many insights that we can get from these launches. The first thing that's important in this region is about the look and feel of a game. So as you might see in the West, there's a lot of games with blocks and balls and geometric shapes. That doesn't work as well in China and Asia as a whole, particularly for the marketing of a game. You really need a little bit of character, a little bit of storyline, and this can be and it should be for a hyper-casual game, stay very, very light, but nonetheless, some character really helps a game be pushed in this region. So an example of that is Fluffy Fall, which is a game we did with What Games out of Paris. We adapted a few of their fluffy characters to reflect Chinese characters around the Lunar New Year, and it really helped us to push UA for this particular game. There's a self-deprecating humor and kind of awkward scenarios that we've seen work really well in China. This game was developed by a Japanese developer and put over there. It's called Skip School. So there's a sense of kind of nostalgia and humor, and it became very viral, which is, when you talk about viral in China, the viral factor there is so huge. And so having a little bit of virality or thinking about how that could be the case in your game is important as you're developing it as well. Now, there are some things you can do you can't necessarily just have something be viral, but to support that, of course, you need to be thinking about social sharing and the channels you need to be allowing for talking about your game, like TikTok and WeChat as well. Day 7 retention is something else that's very important. This is industry-wide, I think, but in hyper-casual, it's especially important. Your Day 7 retention is the key number that's going to tell you if you will make money in your game. Day 1 retention tells you that your core gameplay loop is working, but Day 7 retention really tells you how much you could potentially make from this game. So if you increase Day 1 retention by 1 percentage point, like from 40 to 41, for example, versus increasing your 7-day retention from 10 to 11. If you increase your Day 7 retention, you actually have a 10x lift on lifetime value as opposed to increasing your Day 1. So Day 7, if you focus on that number, it's super important, again, for that monetization and lifetime value of your players. Bursts of gameplay. The snackability of gameplay for hyper-casual is what drives people to them. In China in particular, the session lengths, I just want to note, are slightly longer. So we're talking about 3 to 5 minutes instead of 1 to 2 minutes in China. It's just something to be thinking about in terms of your gameplay, what you're allowing for, and then, of course, building in some smart advertising opportunities within that time. Localization is an important piece of that. You do need to adapt the game slightly. With Hypercasual, it's not so much, but we definitely look to culturalizing and localizing the games when we launch them here. It's important, but I want to note that it's a light amount. What we see a lot of is games going out with like a Google Translate to Chinese in terms of the language. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. Get a local person to help you do that. And also to just take a look at the look and feel. Some colors, some of the characters and things like that might need to be adapted. My last point is that Chinese players really have a high threshold for seeing advertising. We don't see retention. There's kind of a trade-off between how many ads you can show and your retention, and that trade-off in China is less so. So in building games for this market, really think about opportunities to put advertising in. Don't be shy about it, because it is an experience that the players engage with and they don't mind. So that's what I wanted to share today about Hypercasual, some of the what we've seen work in games and how we've seen this evolving in this region. So it's great to be here again in Hong Kong to talk with you guys about what you're building, see if we can help, and if you have games that you would like to present to us, definitely come up and have a chat. Okay, thank you.
We have time for questions if you guys want to ask something. Apparently everybody wants to contact you after this one.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Do you
to
have
do that.
questions? If they are all very quiet, I would like to make one.
Yeah.
China before didn't have much tradition with ads. What kind of ads are more popular in China at the moment? When you're talking about hypercasual, what are the ads that they are more acceptable to engage?
I mean, it's the same everywhere that rewarded video is a great ad format because it's integrated into your gameplay. It rewards the player. If you can think of opportunities, one game that we published for Chimpworks in China for them was called Power Painter. I totally recommend playing this game and looking at how they've integrated advertising because they've done it so elegantly, and it's a really nice format, I think, for the players as well. Yeah. Great.
Last chance. One there. Just a second. I run.
Just like in terms of social sharing of results and things like that in China, people posting to their social accounts, how well they've done and past levels and stuff like that. Do you see a difference in how that's treated, outside of China and how that's treated in China?
I think the U.S., like the Western markets, Europe, U.S., Canada, kind of had a backlash against social sharing because of Facebook, quite honestly. And so, right, remember when if you use Facebook, your Facebook feed was like full of gaming stuff. And so they had to scale that back because players didn't like that. The users of Facebook really hated it and kind of backlashed against it. So I think it's a little bit faux pas in the West to share content like that, gaming content in particular, which is interesting. Whereas that's less so from what we see in China and the Asian markets as well, that there's just more opportunity around that. They're happy to do it. There may be appropriate channels for sharing that as well that the players tap into as well. So yeah, I think there's a little more activity behind that. That's just my sense, that there's more activity behind that here.